and welcome to another great expert panel. This is coaching salespeople to improve performance, and let's face it, that's a subject that's almost an eternal subject of interest to all of us. For those of you who have joined us as attendees, you're in listen-only mode, but there is a question window. And if you want to ask questions, just pop them in that question window, and we'll either deal with them during the broadcast or at the end of it, depending on their relevance to what we're talking about. So this is brought to you by SalesPOP online sales magazine. If you haven't already subscribed, I encourage you to do so. You will find lots of great experts and thought leaders who contribute to this. It's salespop.pipelinersales.com. So I really encourage you to subscribe to that. Also brought to you by Pipeliner CRM, the world's most visual CRM system. If you have a sales team and you have a sales process, or you want to implement a sales process, this is the system for you. All right. So again, my name is John Golden from Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine, and I'd like to welcome our panelists, one who's running a little late, who'll be joining us shortly. But what I thought I'd do, rather than read out the bios of the panelists, I thought I'd give them a couple of moments to introduce themselves, give their background, and their expertise on sales coaching. All right, let's start off with Dr. Richard Ruff. Dick, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody about yourself?
Right, thanks, John. Yes, I've been in the sales training and coaching business for quite a while. I started back with Neil Rackham during the startup days at Huthway. And then in the year 2000, my business partner and wife started Sales Momentum. Whole idea behind that was to get involved in developing some new delivery systems. And we spent a long time focusing on sales simulations. And we're still doing that to this day. The most recent effort was formed a partnership with John Hoskins to develop a new software-based training and coaching capability to support John's new book called Level 5 Selling. So that's a little bit of the institutional kind of thing. Educationally, my background is in psychology, and I originally went to an engineering school up in New York State. So that's a quick 30,000 foot view, John.
Yes, thanks, Dick. Okay, Matt, why don't you give us your background?
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, I'm Matt McDarby. I'm currently the president of United Sales Resources, and my path in the sales training and coaching business starts a little bit after Dick, but in the same place. I worked for Huthway as well, just a few years after Dick moved on, and sort of grew up in the sales training business there. And in that time, sold to middle market and very large global organizations. And one of the things that I learned was the thing that ultimately separates a really great sales transformation initiative and one that is not so great or that fails is the degree to which sales managers are really engaged and coaching and supporting the effort. So after a 7-year stint at Huthway, I started my current company, and our focus is on sales management, coaching, and advisory services. So our focus really is developing that, what Dick and Neil Rackham called many years ago the pivotal role, crucial juncture between where strategy and execution meet. And I think the hardest job in any organization is the sales manager. So that's our focus. We've got a small team, and we spend most of our time essentially coaching the coaches. How do you lead a more effective sales organization? We're not a traditional training organization per se. We do some things to help organizations diagnose what may be getting in the way of the performance that they want. We'll help them build out their own methodology, because at our heart, we are just great diagnosticians here. And then we help them to execute, mainly by focusing on that sales management layer. And live in the DC area, originally from the New York area, and I'm thrilled to be with you today.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Matt. Let's. Perry is having a little difficulty getting in, so we will go ahead and start with this anyway, and she'll join us as soon as she can. What I wanted to do is a quick poll, and before I do the quick poll, as just a disclaimer as well. I also worked at Huthwaite, as many of you already know. I worked there after Dick did, and Matt and I worked together for a time. So all of us have a lot of background in sales coaching and the challenges that it throws up. Throw up may actually be a good word. So let's select the poll. Here we go. I'm going to launch the poll. So if all of you, this is just to get an idea of the role of those of you who are joining us today. And if you could just fill this out, it would just give us an idea who we have. So we'll just give you a couple of moments to fill this out, and hopefully during that time hopefully Peri will be able to get in. All right, let's see. We nearly have everybody voting so far. Just another couple of moments. I'm very excited about this discussion today because, as we said at the beginning, sales coaching is such a perennially difficult area and subject, and so it's fascinating to hear what everybody has to say today and what contributions you guys who are attending have. All right, I'm going to close the poll. And I'm going to share the results quickly. And we see a good mix of sales leaders and executives, salespeople, and sales operators. So basically, everybody pretty much on the call, and I'm sure the others do as well, but everybody on the call pretty much has a good invested interest in sales and revenue performance, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today. All right, good. Okay, let's get started to our first question, and just checking, Matt and Dick, you can see my screen okay? You can see the slides?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, let's start off with something very simple and basic. Maybe, Dick, if you want to start off with this one, let's just define what sales coaching is and what it isn't, because I've always found that it's to some people it's quite a gray area. So how would you define it?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, John. Let me start with the second part of the question, actually, which is what it isn't. I think it's important, if you're going to get it right, to know what it isn't. It isn't counseling, and it's not teaching. Mm-hmm. It's not training. It's not mentoring. Those are all good things, but they're not coaching. And perhaps the most important thing it isn't helping the salespeople to sell more stuff. I think what it is very straightforward. I think both you and Matt sort of have referenced it in work that you've done. The sales manager is really the pivotal job if you want to build an effective sales team. And coaching is probably their most important responsibility. And what it is, it's all about helping salespeople to be more effective and more efficient in selling. It's providing that guidance to help them do that. And operationally, it's about observing people. It's about reviewing what went on, and it's about providing them feedback. And it's pretty hard to overemphasize its importance.
And what about
I think Matt? I would stop there.
Yeah, Matt, what would you add to that?
Well, not a lot, other than if you're trying to understand what sales coaching is, it's important to understand like where and when is it happening as well, right? So Dick's provided a pretty good definition of what it is, and for a sales manager specifically, coaching tends to take the form of or it tends to happen in the context of certain levels of planning, right? So the rep is thinking about his or her approach either to the next call, or to their strategy to win a specific opportunity, or to their overall plan for building a stronger relationship and account strategy. So, I think it's important to acknowledge that there's sort of different layers of coaching. We may be trying to affect as coach, we're trying to affect performance maybe it's at a deeply tactical sort of level. This person needs to learn how to ask a certain kind of question, a clarifying question, for example. And there are other levels like, look, this person needs to be more focused on building trust with their customers, right? And those, the what we're coaching depends on the context in which the coaching occurs. So I think the other thing about coaching is it can be, deeply tactical, but also, highly strategic, and it largely depends on what opportunities does that coach select in order to deliver her coaching. So that's the only build perhaps I would offer, because I think Dick's definition was obviously right on target.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I do think it's always important to start with what it isn't, because I think there's a lot of confusion, as Dick mentioned, and as you, Matt, between the difference between tactical and strategic, difference between mentoring and coaching. So anywhere we go, and we've all done this, and we've all worked with big organizations, and we've all had experiences, both with your own companies and with Huthwaite and others before, is everywhere you go, right, people agree sales coaching is really, really, really important, right? If you asked, most organizations, they'd say, yeah, it's really important. But why do few actually do it, or do it well? Maybe Matt, do you want to start?
I take that one?
Yeah. Matt, you kick that one.
Yeah, I don't want Dick to give all the good answers here and leave me. Two reasons, I think. One is time. We'll get to that in a moment. And the other is, I think they lack confidence at it. On the time thing, as I mentioned, I spend almost all of my time coaching sales managers or sales management teams, and the universal complaint of all sales managers, regardless of how long they've been doing the job, the culture in which they operate, their tenure, they all complain about the same thing. And they say, basically, I don't have enough time to do important things well. In fact, John, as you know, I've just written a book that's kind of all about that, right? So it's focused on, well, what do you do about all that? But so I think the number one reason is sales managers don't even know how to find the time to do it. We talked earlier about the fact that they're at this junction between strategy and execution, challenging role, pivotal role, right? They're dealing with salespeople. They frequently have direct interaction with customers. They're dealing with senior and executive level leaders in their own business. They've got administrative responsibility. They've got, they've got to be out in the field, on and on and on and on and on. Eventually, they just run out of hours. So I think the number one reason that very few people actually do it is because they don't even know how to make the time to do it. So that's one reason. Then the other one is kind of related to that. They don't have a great deal of confidence. They don't know if they're doing it particularly well. And I think that's for a few reasons. One, they don't get a lot of practice at it, referencing the first part of my answer. Right? If they don't make a lot of time for coaching, it's like going out and playing golf, which I just did over the weekend. You're going out and playing golf, 2 or 3 times a year, which again applies to me, and then, expecting to be any good at it. Well, guess what? I wasn't, and a coach who doesn't coach very often is not going to be very good at it either. And so if they know that they're not really delivering a lot of value for a salesperson in the context of coaching, I think they shy away from it. So it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I don't coach, I'm not very good at it, and I'm not very, and I won't coach any more than I need to because I'm not very good at it. So they never really kind of break out of that. So I think the two big reasons is people acknowledge that it's important, but the two main reasons they don't do it is time and they lack confidence.
Excellent. And I think Peri is joining us. I think we'll see in a moment. Richard, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I would just pick up on one of Matt's points, which is the time thing. I think it's a classic example of the urgent dominating the important. As the question suggests, most people agree that it's a good idea, but it just doesn't happen because of time constraints. And why do people run out of time? Well, they run out of time because that sales manager has so much other stuff. they get so many things that are absolutely urgent, which are administrative in nature, that it just eats up the calendar. So it's very hard to do something which they themselves know is important when you have urgency knocking down your door. It's what about those quarter numbers that we've got to increase? Let's get out and do that. So I think the time is the big problem, and I think that's a leadership issue. Individual sales managers cannot solve that problem by themselves. It has to start at the top. I think that the time problem is increased by when managers actually do find enough time to get out in the field and coach. Then what happens is a majority of that time is helping the sales rep to sell.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're being beat up on the numbers. So even when they do finally manage to sneak out of the office and get out there and do something, the urgent will dominate yet again. Help me sell this. Let's go on this call where we're trying to close this deal. So it's a leadership issue. I think it's very short-sighted if you don't actually at an institutional level say, how are we going to fix this time problem? Just to reinforce what Matt said, I think it's one of the number one reasons why it doesn't happen. Okay. And until you solve that, whatever else you do, you're whistling in the wind.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Richard. And Peri, you've joined us.
I have indeed.
Yeah, sorry about that. There was a bit of a mix-up. But Peri Shawn has joined us, author of Sell More with Sales Coaching. So Peri, jump right in. Why do you think people agree sales coaching is really important, but few actually do it?
I would definitely agree with the issue of time, but I won't add to that. I also think a major component that we see at our end in our company is that, one, it's not easy to do coaching in the first place. And what we've discovered, for example, we had one organization, 50 sales managers that we were called in to train and teach them how to coach. And as part of the coaching that we were doing with them, the first interview, every single individual shared with us, oh, thank God you're here to help us, because they each said, we've created the time in our schedule to coach. We go meet with the team, but we really don't know what we're doing. So part of it is because the expectation of sales managers is that they coach, but often they haven't had any training. It's all about people development and improving the quality of those conversations. And in many cases, the sales managers haven't gotten that background, and that's the reason it's they don't actually do it as often or as effectively as they could.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with you, and I think agree that certainly time's a big issue, leadership priorities are a big issue, and absolutely the skill is a really big issue, because we're expecting people to often do something that they haven't, as you say, haven't been trained in. And often the expectation is, well, you were a top salesperson, so you should be able to coach other salespeople to be great salespeople too, right?
Bingo.
Yeah. So, and maybe, Peri, we'll continue on with you, starting on this next question. What do you think most salespeople's experience of sales coaching has been, or people's versions of sales coaching?
Yes. Great question. Most of the experience, and I'll sort of, before they get appropriate training, the sales management, typically what they experience is okay, what's your numbers? What's your how many people did you meet with this last week? How many people are you planning to meet with this week? Tell me a little bit about your scheduling and your strategy going forward. And so that's what most salespeople experience, and on an average experience has been.
Mm-hmm. What about you? Dick? What's your experience with? What do you think most salespeople have experienced when they experience sales coaching?
Well, I would just reinforce what Peri just said. I'm not sure they ever experience coaching. So So if you ask them, you know, what coaching have you gotten, they give you very strange interactions that they've been a part of which Peri just described quite accurately. You know, people telling them what to do versus providing some sort of guidance, asking them why they're not doing certain kinds of things that somebody else thinks they ought to be doing. So I think it's a very, I think you can use words like, first of all, it's limited, their experience. I think it's very mixed. I think in most cases, they would probably tell you that it's desperately missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what about you, Matt? Because I know we've talked about this before in detail, and I do think that a lot of, that's why I picked this graphic here, because I do think a lot of people, they think, oh, coaching, what's my experience of coaching? Oh yeah, it was that guy who used to shout at us during practice when we were in Little League or whatever. So basically all I need to do is just bark a load of orders at people.
Yeah, well, ironically, I'm a, I think you know this, I'm a youth football coach in my spare time.
This is actually, you on the left here.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, got a little more hair. But I'd say that you could characterize it as, and I see this is the current state in organizations where I arrive, or me and my team would arrive, and you look at these. And you've got it in quotation marks here. That's appropriate, because it doesn't, they call it sales coaching, but you watch it and say, wow, that's not what I would call it. I think the best way to describe it is it's low value. The rep gets pulled into a discussion. He or she, I think the intent of coaching should be that it's of value to the person being coached. So we've got to deliver some sort of insight. There's some opportunity that they're not pursuing, or that they haven't even identified for themselves? Is there some problem perhaps in their approach? If they don't have a moment like that in the context of a coaching conversation, then it's low value. It's just kind of a waste of time. And the person who has we said sales managers have this issue of time. Well, salespeople are virtually the same complaint, right? So you put a bunch of people in a room who don't have a lot of time. They cover a bunch of ground, often too much, and it's of little to no value. That's how you could probably characterize coaching and how it's done in a lot of places right now, and that's a shame.
Yeah, and I think one thing to add to that is that even with the best of intentions, even if a sales manager puts a sales coaching appointment on a salesperson's calendar, it's the one that gets moved the most, right? It's the one that's seen as the least important. Okay, so Peri, let's go back to you. So let's flip this over and say, okay, let's start. We know all the issues facing us. So how can we start to create a coaching culture within an organization?
And I'm going to respond with very carefully. The short version, the first thing that you really need inside the organization is a champion. Somebody who is really committed to the coaching and the coaching culture, because you're going to be to create that coaching culture, you need someone who is like the catalyst going forward. Part of it is also creating structures internally, so that as a leader, I know how often I'm expected to be coached and how often I'm expected to coach my team. So that you have a sustainable model by having, the sales manager, the salesperson being coached by the sales manager being coached by the director, and the director being coached by the VP. And that gives you a coaching culture that's more sustainable. And we're looking at it through sales, but in a larger sense in the organization, is to do the same throughout all divisions, because that gives the most sustainable and the best results for an organization. The other is to build in to the system feedback. And I'm not saying feedback only for the person that reports to you as a leader, but that you're, as a leader, getting feedback from the team on a regular basis. And I say it's to be part of every conversation, every coaching conversation, so that you're both supporting one another. Because that's, my role, if I'm a sales manager, is to help my team do better. So what better thing to do than find out, What can I do to help you do even better next week? Simple question. And so those kinds of components and structure and tools to support the organization as they go through it. It's possible. It's a major commitment on behalf of the leaders in the organization.
Absolutely. And how about and Dick, what would you add to that?
Well, I think if you attack the question about how do you create a culture that's actually going to work, I think such a culture would have a couple of characteristics. I think you somehow have to build into the culture a recognition and reward system. Sales managers get recognized and rewarded for making the numbers. So what's the recognition and reward for really doing a good job coaching? That has to be part of that, of the mechanics that you have to establish to create the culture. I think you have to figure out, back to our time issue, what don't you want the managers to do? You have to find some things that they don't do so all their time doesn't get eaten up, and that's a leadership question. Mm-hmm. I think the other part of establishing a coaching culture is finding a way to systematically archive best practices. What are the good guys doing on a good day when it comes to coaching, so that when you hire new sales managers, you have some real institutional history that tells you, hey, here's how to get started, guys. This is what our best are doing on a good day. The other thing is again, back to leadership, is it's just thinking, what are the kinds of resources that you need to provide to the sales manager that would help them to do a better job coaching, and to really figure that out. And the answer, depends on the particular institution you're in, but it's a resource issue, and that's both material resources and human resources. Mm-hmm. So I think those are some of the things that you have to come to grips with if you're going to create a sustainable culture that's going to actually do something.
Yeah, what would you add to that, Matt?
Well, in parallel with what Peri and Dick were talking about at the sales management level, there's this parallel effort. You've got to set the expectation with the sales force, whether it's just a few people or many thousands of people. You've got to set the expectation that you will be coached, right? That there's part of this that they have to participate in, right? You don't create a culture in an organization simply by making an adjustment in the management layer. You've got to establish certain expectations. You've got to make, in this case, coaching activities part of it's one of the norms in the organization. So I think it's the only add then, I guess, would be set the expectation, deliver the message to the people in your sales organization. You will be coached. And the more important part of that is the back half of that. You actually have to then follow through. Mm-hmm. So if you say, look, we're going to make this part of our cadence as an organization, this is going to be an established norm, this is just what we do, you should expect to regularly participate in coaching sessions with your boss and maybe with others. Mm-hmm. You can say that, but you darn well better follow through on it if you say it, because if you don't, then obviously that devalues the notion of coaching and sends a pretty strong message to the sales force about what kind of a culture it really is.
Yeah, no, I agree with what everybody said. I think that's absolutely, there has to be a real commitment to it. There has to be leadership buy-in. There has to be space created to do it. And I think people just have to also recognize the value, the ultimate value, right? If you can coach your salespeople to perform better, even if you get a little incremental improvement from most of them, that translates into real economic value. That is going to generate you more revenue.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe we expand upon it too. And maybe starting with you, Dick, what are some of the other things you need to do before you ever start sales coaching? How do you need to get prepared?
Yeah, that's a good question. We certainly have talked about a number of things. I think I would just add one other perspective. I think one of the things you need to do before you get started is to recognize that you ought to stop doing training unless that is sales training, unless you are also willing and able to have an integrated coaching component. Mm-hmm. And you should stop hiring people that look like us to do just training stuff. And when we say, gee, you ought to do a coaching thing too, they go, well, yeah, maybe later. Don't do that. I mean, I think it's before you ever get started, you need to say, I am willing to do a training, but I recognize that it absolutely positively must have an integrated coaching component, or we're not going to do the training, because the research is clear. If you don't have a coaching component, whatever skills that you gain in the training, in about 3 or 4 months, 86% of them are gone. They just decay. So think of it in terms of money. 86% of every dollar you spend is wasted. So I think before you get started, you need to come to grips with that as just an underlying important thing to do. I would say the second thing that maybe is back to our time thing, which we've been hitting on. Before you get started, you ought to really look at some of the things that have been going on in the last couple of years in the software industry in regard to online coaching. What's happened in the last 2 or 3 years has been staggering. The capability to do online coaching is just significantly different than it was 5 years ago, and you ought to look and understand what that capability is, because it helps you to address the time issue.
What about you, Peri? What would you advise people to do before they ever start?
I would definitely piggyback on what Matt said earlier. I think that with a sales team, it's important to recognize as a leader that your responsibility is to sell the team on sales coaching, so that they see the value of it. And part of what I suggest to do that is to really let them know that, okay, up to now we've been playing football. And going forward, what we're going to be really doing is we're going to be playing, let's choose another game, we're going to be playing tennis. Mm-hmm. And what this looks like is you're going to be doing most of the talking. I'm going to be asking questions, but you're going to be thinking out loud about your specific conversations, and we're going to work together on helping you. This is all about your development. No evaluation is going to happen during coaching. We're only going to be evaluating based on your results. So the more we talk about, the more you share with me about what's really going on, the more helpful I can be to you, and the better your results will be. The other is, I'm a big believer in diagnostics. I believe before starting any coaching, 3 diagnostics are best. 1, for the sales manager to determine what they need in order to do better. 2, 1 for the salesperson to discover what they need in order to do better. And then an independent one, which the sales manager does, which is it diagnoses based on what the salesperson's results are, determines what possible challenges they're having with certain sales skills. That combination allows the sales manager to move forward in a way that's most helpful to the team members, because as we know, it's all about knowledge and skill, and you want to develop a depth of knowledge about each team member's knowledge and skill gaps so that you can help them fill those gaps and do that much better in their conversations.
Yeah, I love that, Peri, because what's that saying is, what's it? Prescription without diagnosis is malpractice, right?
Yes. Exactly.
And how about you, Matt? How would you advise people, or what to do before you ever start coaching?
Well, I mean, taking off on that point about diagnosis, I think then if you've really zeroed in on what are the methods we need to use here in this organization, right? And I'm not talking about, some off-the-shelf commercial thing that we're trying to adapt and squeeze in here. I'm talking about what are the methods that we actually need to execute here in order to get the business outcome we want within this organization. Once you've done that diagnosis, it's helpful, I think, to be able to have a language to describe it. Do we have some sort of I've witnessed enough coaching sessions between a coach and a salesperson where the language is a little bit unclear, and it becomes such a barrier to their reaching, some common conclusions about what needs to be done next, and what kinds of questions might need to be asked, and what kind of buying roles need to be engaged in this decision. And when they're using different sorts of language that's unclear, that can be a real problem. So whether you go with a commercial off-the-shelf sort of, we know some of the language. I won't reference the company some of us worked for before, because I don't want to. It'll sound like I'm knocking them or companies like them, and I don't want to do that. I'm simply saying that it's useful to have a common language. Do you really need to buy that from someone else? I don't know. I think if you've done a proper diagnosis and you have effective language that you can use to describe the behaviors that you really want to encourage in the business, then use that language, right? And just make sure that between coach and rep, that there's real clarity on what that language is. So develop your own lexicon, your own methods, but have something. I think that's after proper diagnosis and making time and building confidence in one's ability as a coach, then it's really useful to have some sort of a common lexicon or language so you can shorthand with the rep, because you're talking about, in some cases, complex deals, and it's a lot easier if you can just get to the heart of the matter and be using roughly the same language to describe the same things.
All right. Can each of you share some success stories? Obviously, you don't need to name the organizations, but share some anecdotal success stories where you've really seen coaching work and what difference it's made to those organizations. Maybe Dick, if you want to start with this one, where have you seen this really work, and what does it look like?
Well, I think one of the success stories that I was thinking about was one where the company itself really struggled with doing anything that one might call as excellence when it came to coaching. Yet the success story is one sales manager all by herself did it in an outstanding way, where her team was the high producer year after year after year. So the sort of nice thing about that story is that even in an environment where you weren't getting a heck of a lot of support from the company, is it possible for an individual sales manager to do it, and to do it at a level of excellence? And at least this one person was able to do that and the way they did it is they very, very cleverly leveraged institutional resources that other people were not aware of and did not utilize. She very effectively used the marketing people. She very effectively used their clinical support staff, who were technical experts. So she put together a way of coaching which recognized the constraints of our organization and also leveraged unused resources in our organization. So it was just one of those, there is a ray of sunshine even in the darkness kind of story, which I thought was truly a success story.
And how about you, Matt? Where have you seen some great successes, and can you describe what they look like or how they came about?
Yeah. Well, the one that comes to mind is one of my longest running clients. It's a manufacturing company we've been working with for several years, and they'd committed a few years back to their own sort of methodology. It was based on some common accepted practices, a customer-focused sales process, a kind of a question-driven selling model. And they, like a lot of organizations, the first step that they took was training the sales force, which was fine. But what they found was, predictably, they weren't seeing a massive amount of change. Results really didn't change right away after training. In fact, they saw people sort of confused and generally not headed in the right direction. So they, as a sales leadership team, this is a middle market organization, so it's a sales management team of about a dozen people, got together to really diagnose what was the issue. And they realized, look, we've got a good sales process. We've got a perfectly sound method for engaging with customers. We have a good opportunity strategy approach. We just have to help our people to execute it more effectively. So we've been working with that sales management team for a number of years, and one of the first challenges was, how the heck do we even find the time to do this? How do we build this coaching culture? And those are two related thoughts. The first step that they needed to take was to actually commit and make changes to their calendar. This is an organization that had a certain cadence from the top down, and they needed to adjust it in order to make more room for coaching. And they were willing to do that. And lo and behold, over time, it's really been amazing to watch. They've got, each one of the sales managers from first line manager up to third line has sustained that commitment to being a better coach. The reason that they did that was because fairly early on, they knew they were winning deals that they otherwise would not have won. Why? Simply because they just made time to focus on early stage opportunities and help their reps to plan and influence the outcomes of some of those opportunities in a positive way. So it was just, they got a little bit of an early taste of success. It sustained them. They wanted to do more. And now we're 5.5, nearly 6 years later, and working with this organization. They've grown and new market challenges, but they remain as committed today to coaching as they were back then. Only they're double the size. They've grown several $100 million over that time, and a lot of that has to do with how they've changed their culture, and that was driven mostly through coaching.
Excellent. And how about you, Peri? What are some examples that you've seen?
Let's see. There's a organization that we've worked with. We first came in, actually, it's kind of interesting. We started coaching one of the leaders in the organization as a test. They wanted to see about our skill sets. Then they decided, okay, you passed the test. So they had us come in and do sales training and sales coaching at the same time. And the training was packaged with, multiple coaching interactions, as well as coaching observations as a part of the graduation of the program. And at the end of that time frame, which was a couple of months, they doubled their sales, which we thought, great, cool. And then the leadership said, now what we would like is a coaching program for all of the leaders inside the organization, from president all the way down to the managers at each level. And so we did that. The size of the organization, it took several years. And by the end of 4 years, the organization quadrupled their assets. So it was really neat to see. I mean, dedication. Talk about that first person we were coaching at the beginning was the champion. So they were an ideal example of that process. And today we still keep the coaching dynamic with the executive in the organization to create it as sustainable for them. Another organization, there's 10 ways to measure sales coaching. And one of the measures that the president of the company was very fascinated with was market changes. That as a leader, he was reading the journal, speaking with other executives, and in conversation, he realized that what he's getting is not real-time information. The real-time information is in the hands of the sales team and anybody who's client-facing. So what we did is we delivered a program, again, packaged with coaching and training, to teach the team how to ask more effective questions. And this means anybody who's client-facing, the management as well. And as we went through that process, within a period of a couple of weeks, what the president thought might be something happening in the marketplace, they discovered that yes, it was, and there was more to it that was happening in the marketplace real time. And so they were an organization that was very able to respond very quickly. And what they did was designed a product to respond to that need in the marketplace. And due to confidentiality, I can't say the exact amount or such, but let's suffice it to say hundreds of millions of dollars that they put on their books that they wouldn't have put on if they hadn't have done this one thing of really listening very carefully to what clients are saying and discovering that there was a real need in the marketplace. At the end of that year, they won Product of the Year for their industry.
Right.
simply because they responded in such a quick fashion to the need in the industry, which was, I was their cheerleader on the side. Very excited for them.
No, that's excellent. And I've seen some successes myself in the past. Actually, seen Matt and myself, back in the day, implemented a early stage focus approach and coach salespeople on that, and that had great impact. It's amazing when you get sales managers to draw back from being the late stage super closer and more into the early stage, um, diagnostic helper. Okay. What we'd always like to do is end with some practical advice. So I'm sure the people listening, this is all great information, and yet this somebody just asked, this session is being recorded and will be available to anybody who registered. You'll get an email with it. It'll also be on SalesPOP, so you can share it with your teams. So let's ask about baby steps, right? If you're dipping your toe into sales coaching now, what are a couple of baby steps or a baby step that you can take to get started? Because sometimes it's daunting. Some people try to do too much at once. Dick, what would you advise somebody as a good first baby step to get going?
Well, I think that the key to that was the question you asked, which was the baby step. Do take a baby step. And how you might translate that if you were a sales manager is don't try to implement a coaching initiative for your entire sales team. Explain what's going on to the entire sales team, but then pick one or two people to work with, rather than trying to coach, your entire span of control, which may be 10 or 12 people. So that's one thing you could do. I think the other thing I would do, sort of related back to the success story, I would really poke around in my organization to find out what resources I could leverage to help me get the job done. In a lot of organizations, there are a lot of people who are really smart and are being underutilized. And the question is, how might I utilize those people to help me do a better job in getting started on coaching? So I would start with one or two people, and I would find some people in my company who had both the competency and excitement about maybe helping me do it.
Okay, excellent. How about you, Matt? What are some baby steps you think somebody could take?
Two really simple ideas. One, if you're a sales manager listening to this, look at your calendar. Look like next Monday or Tuesday, and put an hour on the calendar for coaching. Right? Just literally, if you put it on the calendar and treat it as you would a meeting with a client or a meeting with the big boss, it has a way of ensuring that that it might actually happen. Now, don't delete it. Don't cancel it. If you have to move it, you can move it. But the very first step is just get some time on the calendar to do it. When you do it, my recommendation would be, if you're one of those who sort of lacks confidence at this and is really just trying to build your chops as a coach, just like we were talking about earlier, it's like a golf swing. If you don't do it all that often, it just doesn't feel very good. You've got to give yourself some practice opportunities. So you wouldn't want to pick your biggest, most strategically important deal to start practicing on. Pick maybe one or two, early stage, fairly low risk. Maybe it's a small deal, or it's it's not your biggest, gnarliest client. But go out of your way to look in the pipeline and find some deals that are just developing, and focus on those. And go out of your way. Tell the rep that we've got two objectives here. One, I'm going to do what I can to help you gain traction on this deal. And two, between you and I got to practice at this a bit. There's some things that I'm working on. I want to ask better questions. I want to try to help you gain some insight. I want to deliver more value to you in these sessions. And I think you'll find the reps are quite receptive to it. That's actually how we open up most coach sessions, right? Those 2 points. If you can, and if you can find a partner in the business who can be there to observe and watch you in action and take some notes, And that might be step 3, right? So it's, one was find an hour on the calendar, just commit. 2 is pick some early stage, low risk opportunity and be open with your rep about the fact that you're doing this to help them, but also to help yourself. And then 3, if the resources are available, to Dick's point, if you can get somebody there to observe and give you some feedback. But I think those are in sort of ascending order in terms of difficulty. Those would be my recommendations, John.
Okay, and Peri, how about you? What are some baby steps that you would advise?
Great. And ditto to what they've been saying. They are great ideas. I would say first and foremost, be kind to yourself. And the reason why I say that is that it's a process of learning how to do it. It's not going to be perfect first time. And that I think needs to be put out there in terms of be kind to yourself. One is to get some feedback about your coaching skills first from the team. And the coaching skills, they're 4. We've already been mentioned about asking questions, listening, building trust, and providing relevant information. And see what the team is saying, because as a leader, it's helpful to know, what am I working on? What skill am I working on developing? Because you're not only working on developing your team skills, you're working on developing your own as a coach, so you can help them do that much better. Of course, learn how to coach. And part of it, I actually was speaking with a soon-to-be client last week, and part of what we were doing is planning for him learning to coach. So part of it was his preparation, one of creating the time in his schedule so that it's not a last-minute thing, so that he's working in this next month on the delegation of certain things from his list of things to do, so that he can create that time frame so that he can coach. He's working on being very realistic about it. The other is, to coach means you also need to be coached. So to find someone in the organization, if it's not the person you report to, find someone else, a colleague or so, that maybe you can coach one another on the coaching that you're doing, so that you can improve. Real important to really focus in on listening, because that's the one skill. I've been doing research for over 20 years around trust. And the number one thing that comes back in the 90th percentile every single time is listen to me, is what it takes to earn that trust. And why is trust so important? Because the trust is one thing that when a team member trusts their manager, they will actually tell their manager more of what's actually going on, what's working for them, what's not working for them, so that leader can help them do even better. And also, as a byproduct, which I think is really cool in the research, I was so excited when this first started coming in, is that when a team member trusts their manager, the more they trust them, the better they actually treat clients. Yeah. And so as a byproduct, you have, a better client experience as a result of that focus in on trust. And then again, asking those questions automatically puts the leader in the position to listen, which then builds that trust and allows the leader to be all that much more effective in helping the team make better neurological connections so that they perform better. And it's all about, foundation of trust.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fascinating. And those are great tips. As I said, we always like to keep it nice and practical for the people listening in. And then just before we wind up, I want to give you all a chance just to talk a little bit about yourselves. But before we go, any last insight to share? One thing that one of our attendees has asked is to recommend good sales coaching books. Obviously, Peri, you have yours, which will also be up on our bookstore after this session today. So maybe just start with you. Do you have a quick tip and a book you'd recommend?
Oh, thank you. Obviously my book. I also love Timothy Galloway's book. At the moment, the name of it escapes me at the moment. It's an older book, but it really is a demonstration of the importance of staying in the question, because the question is what makes the difference.
Excellent. And as I said, Peri's book will be available on the SalesPOP Pop bookstore. Dick, how about you? What book would you recommend?
Well, I think, I think I would rather, there are a ton, and I think the ones that my colleagues have mentioned are great. I think maybe the recommendation I would do would tie back to something I referenced earlier, which is to really look at some of the software that's available to help coach today. There are several really fantastic packages which provide capabilities that maybe some people aren't aware of. Let me give you one example that I just happen to be familiar with, which is a company called LearnCore. There are any number of companies that have things that look like what LearnCore is doing, but that would be my one tip, because I think as the future unfolds, more and more coaching is going to be done via sophisticated software packages.
Yeah, thanks, Dick. Yeah, and that's why we have built into Pipeliner CRM our performance insights capability, so that you can get insights into lots of different dimensions of your salespeople, so you can coach them to better success. Okay, and finally, Matt, what book would you recommend?
There is a book I'm reading right now by my new friend Dave Brock. It's called The Sales Manager Survival Guide, and came across it a while back, and I've had a chance to speak with Dave, and we're very much aligned in terms of what does it take for somebody, particularly somebody who's new to the sales management role, to be really effective at that role. And that guide has a great sort of first 30, 60, 90 day structure to it, and I'm really enjoying it. My book, I would be crazy not to mention it, will be out in about 10 days, right this month, and it's called The Cadence of Excellence: Key Habits of Effective Sales Managers. It'll be out on Amazon, and I'll be sharing it with the world, linking all over the place, all over God's creation shortly. And in there is a tip I would share that, for those of us who are listening to this conversation, who are in a sales leadership role, frontline or senior sales leadership role, if coaching scares you, think about it this way, right? The most effective coaches plan their coaching interactions. There's basically three elements to it. They plan what conclusions they want the rep to draw. They determine what questions they're going to ask the salesperson in order to get him or her to reach that conclusion. And then they've got a sense of what clear action, what commitment or action do they want the rep to take as a result of that coaching session. So if you think about it, questions, conclusions, actions. What does that sound like, right? It sounds a lot like selling, right? So if we're effective sellers, we're already practiced at the fine art of asking questions and helping others to reach new conclusions and deliver value. It's the very same sort of thing. We're just doing it internally with our salespeople. So that would be my critical final hint for today. Coaching is selling, guys. There's lots of models out there that'll help you to master coaching. I've written one, I've got one in my book, and I know Dick and Peri have theirs. So study up, practice hard, and have at it. Okay,
and just quick, Matt, how can people contact you?
You can see I'm available on LinkedIn, of course, Matthew McDarby, and my company's website is www.usr-llc.com. We're United Sales Resources. That's another way to reach me. And of course, I'm on Twitter, soon to be on Instagram too.
Yeah, very modern there.
Brave new world.
Yeah, and Peri, how can people contact you?
Again, through my website, that's coachingandSalesInstitute.com. Of course, via LinkedIn, it's Peri, P-E-R-I, last name Shawn, S-H-A-W-N.
Excellent. And Dick?
Probably the best way is to go to our blog site, which is salestrainingconnection.com. All of the how to connect information is there, as well as 400 or 500 articles we've written, which may be useful as well.
All right, great. Well, listen, thanks everybody for joining us today, all our attendees. We the audience stayed with us throughout, which is always good to, I know this is a fascinating subject. The recording will be available, will be sent to all of you who registered and attended, and it will also be available tomorrow on salespop.pipelinersales.com. So again, this is John Golden from Pipeliner CRM. The world's most visual and incident intelligence visualized CRM, and SalesPOP magazine. As I said, this will be on SalesPOP tomorrow, and all our panelists are regular contributors there. I'd like to thank Peri, Dick, and Matt for a fascinating conversation, and look forward to another great panel discussion soon. So thanks, guys, for all the insights today.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you, John.
Okay, goodbye.